At the Applied Ergonomics Conference, keynote speakers bring fresh perspectives to the way professionals think about design, work, and technology. Earlier this month on Problem Solved, we heard from one of this year's keynote speakers, Mark Bendon. Today, we'll hear from the other keynote speaker, Cassini Nazir. In Cassini's keynote speech, he challenged ergonomics professionals to rethink the role of curiosity in design and explained how curiosity, trust, and empathy can shape the systems and experiences we create. Right after his keynote, I had the chance to sit down with Cassini for a quick conversation about curiosity, interaction design, and what he hopes this community will take away from his talk. As it happened, his friend Mike Courtney was with him, CEO of Aperio Insights and futurist, who was actually a keynote speaker at last year's Applied Ergonomics Conference. And we were able to have a quick word with him as well about the pace of technological change and how professionals can navigate a world where innovation is happening faster than ever. First, my conversation with Cassini Nazir. All right, so I'm here with Cassini Nazir, assistant professor at the University of North Texas, specializing in communication design. User experience design, correct?
That's correct.
And you just finished your keynote speech at AEC, and it was fantastic. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you spent a lot of time in your keynote speech talking about specific terms like curiosity, trust, empathy, and you even had some formulas and visuals, and I really appreciated that. But what is one idea that you hope ergonomists and professionals take away from your keynote today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think anyone can be curious.
Yes.
I think as somebody who's in a field where creativity is sort of my domain, there's sometimes the idea in certain areas that creativity is somebody else's job. And I was surprised to find that curiosity can sometimes be somebody else's job of just let me do what I need to do. I think it's everyone's job. And it's deceivingly simple to be curious. It just requires consistent effort, very much like working out or diet or anything that sort of requires consistency in one's approach of doing that. So one of my mentors, my colleagues that I got to work with is Bonnie Pittman. Bonnie was the deputy director of the Dallas Museum of Art. In 2007, Bonnie brought treasures of Egypt. She brought Tutankhamun's tomb, the sarcophagus, to Dallas and a few other cities. Mm-hmm. And Bonnie has this activity of do something new. Mm-hmm. And very much lines up to being curious, because if you try something new, you're exercising your curiosity every day. And Bonnie, who's well into her 80s, has a fabulous Instagram that if you go out there, you will see the ice cream that she tried with the grandkids to just something as simple as a new pair of socks as well. So doing something new can just sort of keep us in the mindset of curiosity, because there's a rigidity, to speak to an ergonomist, that we get ourselves into that doing something new opens us up to. But there are other things that we can do to be curious as well.
Yeah. And so you described interaction design as kind of a two-way conversation. For listeners who are listening and they weren't able to hear your whole speech, can you briefly kind of describe what that means?
Yeah, so we interact with apps, experiences all of the time. Through our phone, through our vehicle, through voice interfaces. These interfaces are all around us, and we have to have a conversation with the interface in order to achieve the thing that we're trying to do. And, I think most designers today understand that it's not the user, it's the design that makes things difficult. If we haven't designed it well, it makes interacting with something difficult for a user. So what interaction designers have historically done is created that interface to make things easier to use, which I think laps over with ergonomics. We also try as much as we can to make them enjoyable. And my research specifically looks at, if we can make them enjoyable, could we also make or invite people to be curious?
Yeah, that makes sense. One really inspirational part of your speech was when you talked about Zebreda, and your students did a project that was kind of inspired by her, and they experimented with everyday inexpensive tools, and they used them for alternative purposes, like using a dustpan with a handle for a leg lift and different things like that. So in that kind of project, you gave several other really great examples, but what surprised you most about that project overall?
I see what you did there.
Yes.
So for those listening or watching, the phrase "what surprised you" is a very powerful way to pull out something new.
In Cassini's keynote speech, he gave several proven ways that people can strengthen their curiosity. When speaking to someone, you can sit up, lean forward, nod your head, track the speaker, and ask questions. Specifically, you can say, "Tell me more," or ask the questions, "What else?" or "What surprised you about something?"
That's such a great question. You've sort of disarmed me with that.
You think I wasn't listening, but I was.
I wasn't expecting that. That's wonderful to have that appear. I think what surprised me the most is that 20-something-year-olds can get to know somebody who's not able-bodied like them, who has an age difference, maybe in some cases an intellectual capacity difference, and they did their best to put themselves into the shoes of someone else, while also being curious about, well, I understand it to be this way. Am I right? Meaning that we can use the same words, but we may not mean the same thing when we use those same words. So I was surprised at just how curious this group was, because curiosity requires intentional effort, and it requires a consistent intentional effort as well. And in some cases, that can be exhausting. I think also design itself, people tend to think of design as sort of making things look good, right? And that's a part of it. But the type of design that I practice, and that I think user experience folks practice, is making things work better. And that was the focus that was here. So students worked on hand grips for individuals who may have tremors or difficulty gripping. Arthritis might be something there. We had a student whose sister, I mentioned, she has, I always say this wrong, EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I may be saying that incorrectly, but essentially she can't raise her hand above her shoulder, so she can't wash her hair. Me not having hair, it's a different issue, but for those of us who have hair, it's not just an aesthetic thing. There are huge problems that can happen as a result of that. So it was tremendously satisfying to see her build something that her sister can actually use. And again, as you said, cost effective and somewhat low price.
Yeah. Do you think also it was kind of the age group of the students that surprised you too, that they were able to kind of take all of these things and come up with such fascinating solutions?
That's a great observation. I think we sometimes underestimate students. I've done that, and I tell myself, and my wife helped me to remember, these students, they sometimes surprise you.
Yeah.
It's very satisfying as a faculty member to work on that.
Yeah.
I think for them as well, these are projects that you often don't get to work on when you're in industry. That, you work, particularly in design, you work on mass market tools that are not a batch of one, if you will. They're a batch of 1 million or more that you're working on. And so this was a unique opportunity for them to be able to do something that they may not be able to do in their professional life.
Yeah, and it resonates with a lot of other people. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So turning our attention to the conference now. So here at I hope that you were able to spend a little bit of time kind of walking around.
Enjoyed it very much.
Good. So where do you see the biggest opportunity for curiosity and human-centered design in this field moving into the future?
Wow. So, let's do it micro and macro. I think micro at a conference, I challenge myself, I challenge my students, if you have the opportunity to go to a conference, meet 5 people. For some people, that's a huge number. For some people, they get that done in about an hour, right? It's just, throttle the number based on your own personality. I tend to be an introvert, so 5 can be my reach number. But in those conversations, it's not just sort of getting to know the name of the person, but getting to know the person and understanding it. So have a deeper conversation. And it's been wonderful here at the Applied Ergonomics Conference that particularly the Ergo Cup. I think if I was thinking about attending AEC, the Ergo Cup would be the thing, in addition to the great speakers, the thing that sort of pushes it over the top. Because it's wonderful to see how everyone here has ignited their curiosity to actually build something. But the macro level of curiosity is essentially what you did, which is asking more questions, right? Of oftentimes that doesn't always require being around a person. We can ask ourselves, well, why is that like that, right? Mm-hmm. And we can sort of, inside of our head, explore things that can be really valuable to reframing our mindsets.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of ways that we can be curious as well.
That's great advice. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of the time at the conference. And again, great speech, and thanks for talking with us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Wonderful.
Cassini's keynote focused on curiosity, asking better questions, designing with empathy, and being open to perspectives that are different from our own. Standing next to him after the talk was someone who thinks about the future of technology every day. Mike Courtney is a futurist and researcher who actually delivered the keynote at last year's Applied Ergonomics Conference. I asked him what he's seeing right now in the pace of technological change and what that means for professionals trying to keep up.
I'm Mike Courtney, and I live here in Dallas, Texas. I'm a researcher and a futurist, and I actually had the pleasure of being a keynote speaker at last year's event.
Amazing. And so what brings you to the conference this year?
You know, it's a great conference. I'm always excited to see what the presenters have and the different booths, but I specifically came to see my good friend Cassini Nazir present. He's always a great person to listen to, always a different perspective.
So as a futurist and somebody who specializes in AI and tech, what are your thoughts and your perspective in your field and what you're seeing here?
You know, I think what I see here and what I see in industries all over the world right now is just the pace of change is really just off the charts. We've spent most of our careers, somebody at my age anyway, you know, where things change every year at a certain, you know, maybe we grew 5 or 10% or something changed 15 or 20%, but now we're seeing things really start to go exponential. And what used to take a year or 2 years or 5 now can happen in a month or 2. And it's a really exciting but challenging time to be in any industry.
What do you think is most challenging about that?
You know, I think the thing that's most challenging is we're all used to being very thorough and really evaluating, you know, what are the options, what are the possibilities, then make a decision. But what happens when the constant flow of things to consider doesn't stop? It's sort of like getting to a restaurant and they say, here's the menu. And by the time you say, I think I'm going to order one, here's the other menu.
Oh, no.
Oh, well, that looks good, too. And then by the time you look through that one, it's like, okay, finally, I'm going to choose. And here's
another one.
Here's a Cheesesteak Factory menu. You're like, what? So every 5 minutes, you get a Cheesecake Factory menu, but the waiter or waitress only comes along every 10 minutes. You're like, I don't know what to pick.
Yeah. So what's most promising about that, though? What's the upside?
I think what's most promising is that humans have never lived at a time like this where if I have an idea or something we're solving, I can solve it. There's so many things that can now help us achieve something that even a short while ago was impossible. So the first thing I tell my clients and my students these days is to say, if you run into a challenge, a frustration, you know, something that upsets you or that you wish were better, the first thing you should do is imagine there's already a solution that's going to work. I just haven't seen it yet. I haven't found it. And you'd be surprised how many times you look and you're like, wow, that exists. You know, something that would, you know, I thought didn't exist.
Yeah.
So look for it.
So somebody who might be feeling overwhelmed by tech and all that, do you have any advice for them, how they can hone in on what they're trying to find? A,
you're not alone. And B, don't try to make a perfect decision. Try to make a good decision for now and remember to revisit it.
That's good advice.
And sort of like the restaurant analogy, make a good decision for now. Ignore the rest of the menu that you didn't even get a chance to read. Make a good decision for now. Get something to eat. And then next time you're back at that restaurant, don't go for that same thing again. Say, now what's new on the menu that I hadn't yet been able to even explore? And be constantly sort of sampling things.
Be curious.
Yeah.
It's good. All right, great. Well, thank you for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
Whether we're talking about design, ergonomics, or emerging technologies, the future belongs to people who stay curious. Thanks for listening to this bonus episode from the Applied Ergonomics Conference. Make sure you subscribe to Problem Solved so you never miss an episode, including a full recap of the Applied Ergo Conference. Every great solution is a story worth telling.